Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to our webinar number 25 on our series talking CamDocUK, talking with the community. CamDocUK is Cameroonian doctors in the UK, which is a professional association of medics, doctors, related professionals based in the UK, working in the National Health Service, the public health system in the UK. It is 6:07 on our series talking with the community number 25. Today we're going to focus on enhancing engagement of the Black community with research, medical research, clinical research. So perhaps for the panelists, they will be introduced as we move from one speaker to the other, but I should point out that we have officers of CamDocUK backing this up like they do for every such webinar. We're going to, I just want to introduce our president of Cameroonian Doctors in the UK, Dr. Linda Bello. I know she'll say something later, but I just want a quick wave.
Hello.
Linda Bello, that is chairperson of Cameroonian Doctors in the UK. She's actually a family doctor, GP, as you may hear, but it's not GP as in Africa, but here is GP, is a family doctor, specialist consultant in family medicine. Dr. Linda Bello is the chair, and then we also have a co-moderator for today. The co-moderator is Dr. Annah Mbene Ngah. Now we can see Anna on the screen. Anna is my co-moderator, and Anna is the communications lead for CamDocUK and also the treasurer. In addition, when she's not doing CamDoc business, Anna is a specialist in chemical pathology at Pinderfields Hospital in Yorkshire. That's in the Leeds area, for those who may not know the geography of the UK, in the Yorkshire, in the Leeds area. And she's also a medical examiner. We have three panelists. The three panelists, like I said, I will say a little bit more when we come to introduce them, each of them. We start with Dr. Jean-Claude Katte. Dr. Jean-Claude Katte is, in addition to being a professional person, he also has a traditional hat, like myself, Mudnizi, one of Bazou in Cameroon. I hope I got the pronunciation right. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble with Cameroonian Chief's house in the UK. Dr. Jean-Claude Katte is a specialist, one of the young, promising doctors at CamDocUK, based at University of Exeter. I'll say a little bit more when I come to that part. Next is Dr. Serge Engamba. Dr. Serge Engamba is, again, another GP consultant in family medicine, community medicine. Serge is also a research, also involved with heavily with research. I must get this right, because Serge is commercial research fellow at the University of Exeter. So we've got two specialists here from the University of Exeter, Dr. Jean-Claude Katte and now Dr. Serge Engamba. Serge is also a GP at Oak Street Medical Practice in Norwich. Norwich is in the east of England. So is actually the PCN research lead. Again, he will say a little bit more when we come to introduce him. I just want to point out that when he's not doing that, as far as CamDoc is involved, Serge is in the executive committee of the Cameroonian Medical Council UK. This is the Cameroon National Medical Council, the UK branch. Serge is actually there and is in charge of the liaison role. The third panelist today as those who have been following CamDoc over the last few years will know that this gentleman is always there. It's our reliable, the fountain. I'll say more when we come to him. Dr. Valentine Ngwa. Dr. Valentine Ngwa is, I don't know if you can see what his screen is saying, but it's right in the middle between Serge and Jean-Claude. Dr. Valentine Ngwa is a consultant physician in elderly and acute medicine. He's the research lead for elderly medicine department at Mid Yorkshire Hospitals NHS Trust. Mid Yorkshire, again, just like Dr. Mbene, that's Leeds, the Leeds part to give some sort of a bearing where we are. We're talking is based in Leeds in the northeast of UK. He's also principal investigator related to his work, as I said, research lead for elderly medicine. So as related to that, he's principal investigator for quite a number of projects, which I'm sure he will probably throw some light on that when he comes to speak. Yes, so that's the 6 people. They're all members of Cameroonian doctors in the UK. 5 people there. I'm sure there will be others who will join us. The membership secretary is usually on board, but she'll probably joining us later. I'm referring to Dr. Eugenie Mempo, who's the membership secretary. And who am I? This is Chief Assah. Just like I was talking about my royal colleague, Bunizi one of Bazoo. Chief Assah is the Assah of the Fontaine dynasty in Bangwalan. And when I'm not doing chieftaincy business, incidentally, I'm the chairman of the Cameroonian House of Chiefs in the UK. But when I'm not doing that, I'm the head of the international affairs at CamDocUK. And when I'm not doing CamDocUK, not doing Bangwa business, I'm a clinical scientist and a public health consultant. I run a hospital at home project company in UK called Team Carita. So that's essentially where we are. And we thank you. All this work was just to make sure that we let more people through the door, by the way. So, and I can see more and more people are coming through. So I just want to say welcome to everyone who's joining us. But we're not going to, we have just 2 hours for this. And we thank you. It's a Sunday evening. People would be probably, when it's in UK, when we talk about Sunday, we start thinking about Monday. So, but we thank you for joining us because it shows how you value what CamDoc is trying to do. Our focus today is essentially how to portray the benefits, and so by portraying the benefits, engage more people from our Black minority ethnic community to be involved with, to participate in research. I'm not going to go into why. I'm not going to go into how. I'm not going to go into when or where, because I've got the experts. The experts are here themselves to tell us. Hello. So we'll just give another couple of minutes and then we're going to kick off. I just want to say that this webinar is being recorded. It will be edited according to CamDocUK official policy and then distributed to the various platforms, our website, YouTube, and we, like most of the things increasingly from CamDoc nowadays, we circulate them to various networks, including the university network in Cameroon, because we found out recently that they're beginning to find some of these things some of our disseminations of particular relevance and utility for the academic community in Cameroon. So yes, we're going to, after proper editing according to our policy and with the approval of the panels, we're going to be disseminating this. It will be on our website. And also the slides that the presenters are actually using today, with their permission, those slides will also be available. And if while you are following the webinar, an interactive process. Go on the chat room, leave questions, leave comments, and the backup team, they are monitoring this. My co-moderator is actually monitoring. You can see the chairperson, Dr. Bello, is there, and my co-moderator, Dr. Annah Mbene. They'll all be monitoring this, and some of this, your comments will be picked up live, and the speaker at that particular point might even want to address them. But again, this is what will help us once the speakers have finished their rounds. We will then go into an all-comer quality question and answer session. So keep dropping your questions and comments. We are actually tracking them. Then the other thing we would like to say is that at the end of this conference, this webinar, we will trouble you to try and leave some feedback so that's to help us how we can actually improve on future webinars, on future such social media broadcasts from CamDocUK. If you have any question, even after this, if you feel that there are certain burning issues which may not have come addressed during the webinar, contact CamDocUK. You can leave questions, go to our website, or you contact international@camdocuk.org. That's an email address. So you go to our website and leave questions. On the front page of our website, you actually have a sheet there where you can leave questions. But for the purpose of this conference, this webinar, go into the panel, to the chat room, and leave comments and questions, and we'll actually address them in situ. So without further ado, we are now at almost 18 minutes past. So again, for those who just joined us now, welcome to the 25th edition of our Talking with the Community series. This is one of those things that CamDoc does as a net contribution to our diaspora community, in fact, our global community. We engage through various initiatives. We have the Young Cameroonian Professional Mentorship Scheme. We have educational programs. We also have an interactive website. And this particular webinar is now 25, number 25. So today we're going to focus on enhancing the participation of the Black community in research. And we've got 3 eminent speakers, as I said earlier, for those who know. So we're going to start off. Our very first speaker today is Dr. Jean-Claude Katte. Jean-Claude Katte is one of the members of, member of CamDocUK, dynamic young clinician and researcher. He's a physician. Is also a doctor of philosophy in diabetes research, which is his passion. Jean-Claude is going to start this talk to actually give us essentially the way we've designed the flow of it, to tell us what really is clinical research and other related issues, to open up the conversation. I said earlier, for those who don't know, he's also a traditional notable like myself. Mbutnizi one of Bazoo. I like saying that, and I'll say it more often. Anyway, so Dr. Jean-Claude Katte, you've got a microphone.
Thank you so much, Chief. I hope my voice is loud and clear for everyone. I'm just going to be sharing my slides now. And I think I have the easiest job among all the panelists tonight, and which is really just setting the scene and telling us, our community, what clinical research is all about. I know we have doctors, we've got nurses, we've got lay people probably attending this webinar tonight, and we will also be catching up this webinar, on our different CamDocUK platforms. So, as I said, what is clinical research? Why is it important? And who are the people involved in clinical research? So, within the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to walk you through these different questions. First of all, I wanted to start off by just situating clinical research within the broader context of research in medicine. Now, if you go through different textbooks, you're going to see different classifications of this. So, but this is kind of my minimalist kind of approach to what research in medicine is. So we can either have basic research. Some people also call that fundamental research. And then clinical research, which we're going to talk about, but also population research or public health research. There are other approaches that we can use to do this classification, but for today and for didactic reasons, we are going to stick to this very minimalist approach. Now, all of this is based on the purpose for that research. Now, when we talk of basic research, it's usually research which is not done in humans, usually in the laboratory. And the purpose or the aim of this research is to look at mechanisms of how things work, whether new pathways for medicines, new targets for drugs, for example. That is that kind of research that is done, within the laboratory. It could be genetics, genomics research, immunology, biochemistry, and histopathology, for example, and without any contact or without any human contact. Now, clinical research, which is going to be our topic for today, really the purpose or the aim is to describe human health, for example, look at disease patterns or to test treatments, or to see how new treatment works, and all of this to improve care. We're going to talk about that more. Meanwhile, population research is really you're dealing with the surveillance of the population of a large number of people. And within that group, you might be looking at the relationship between disease, populations, and health systems. So this is kind of a small approach to kind of situate where clinical research fits in the picture. So clinical research specifically, I would say there are various definitions that you would find out there, either in textbooks or on the internet, but it is a systematic investigation. And I say systematic is important because there is a process to this, using scientific methods to study health issues and to develop knowledge of human health, but also diseases that affect humans, so people in this context. And the overarching aim for clinical research, obviously, is to improve the quality of life of humans. So we have to keep that in mind. The aim, the end goal is to improve the quality of life. So to bring some level of transformation to humankind. So if we go back to what, for example, in the UK, the National Institute for Health and Care Research talks about clinical research. It says it aims to find out the causes of human illness and how it can be treated or prevented. This type of research is based on examining and observing people with different conditions and sometimes comparing them with healthy people. It can also involve research on samples of blood or other tissues or tests such as scans or X-ray. Clinical researchers will also sometimes analyze the information in patient records or data from health and lifestyle. So this is really broad and nice because it really gives us a picture that clinical research is not only focused about me seeing a particular participant in front of me, but I can use that participant sample. I can use data that has already been collected, maybe by the doctors, the physicians, and the nurses of that participant or that person in front of me, to be able to do research with the end goal of improving the quality of health of that person. If you want a very simple, and that is why I love my brothers on the other side of the Atlantic, from the US, clinical research refers to studies or trials that are done in people. Really simple. Those guys are really very simplistic. So you have the UK definition and you have the US definition of what clinical research is all about. So you can choose which one you would go with. So what are therefore the main types of clinical research? There are two main types of research. And the first, remember I talked about observing. So you have studies that are called observational studies. And the main thing here is that the people who are involved, that is the clinical researchers, they only observe patterns of what is happening. They do not carry out any intervention. And the other part of clinical research, main one is the experimental arm of clinical research, or sometimes called interventional research, or the most common names that you would see out there is what we call clinical trials. And the main thing here is that researchers do carry out an intervention with the aim of testing whether that intervention works or affects human health, human behavior. And that intervention, as I said, can be a drug, can be a particular behavior, can be a lifestyle change. For example, how do we know we should walk 45 minutes a day if we want to keep good cardiovascular health? Because clinical researchers have carried out lots of studies and interventions to show that if you're able to walk 45 minutes 3 times within a week, you are able to keep good cardiovascular health. So that is an intervention was carried out, which was walking, and it was studied. So that is why it's called experimental. So without going really too deep, let's come back to observational. As I said, my work is really to set the scene here. What is clinical research? There are two main arms. Clinical research could be descriptive. And when it comes to descriptive part, there are different types of studies or designs that researchers we use. It could be a case study. For example, I see a patient in the hospital, and then I just want to describe that patient's situation. And that is a simple descriptive report. Now, if I have a number, for example, 4 or 5 people presenting within a short space of time, or presenting in a particular way, then that becomes a case series. And then the other part of descriptive here is what we usually do, especially many people who are doing research in Africa would want to carry out a cross-sectional study where it gives you a snapshot of what is happening within a population of people at a given point in time, where exposures, when I say exposures, yeah, something like smoking can be an exposure, and the outcome here, for example, can say, let's say lung cancer or lung disease are all studied at the same time. So that is a cross-sectional study. Now, the aim of descriptive, you're just describing, you are not analyzing, you are not asking a particular question. Now, for analytical observational studies, as you can see, I've put cross-sectional as well, because you can carry out a certain number of analyses within a cross-sectional study. I'm not going to go further into that. But the two core ones here are the case control studies and the cohort studies. So in a case control, you have people who have a particular condition, for example, let's say diabetes, and you have people without diabetes, and you want to study, for example, if alcohol consumption in the past affected the reason why they developed diabetes. And then cohort studies, you have people, you divide them into 2 groups, for example, those who drink alcohol, those who do not drink alcohol, and you want to follow them up and to see whether they're going to develop a particular disease. Now, what I have also added here, systematic review and meta-analysis. Remember, we talked about you could use data already collected, but in this case, this particular type of clinical research, you are carrying out a study of studies. Particularly, you're looking at cross-sectional studies here, case control studies and cohort studies. You can do an analysis of those, and then that becomes a meta-analysis. So for clinical trials, on the other hand, I've just rapidly put this. You could have clinical trials that are controlled or non-controlled. And for controlled, which are the best forms of these clinical trials that are commonly used, you can either have those that are where participants in the study would undergo randomization, and therefore we call them randomized controlled trial. And the other group where there is no randomization, that is, people are not randomly allocated to whether they are receiving a particular treatment, a particular lifestyle intervention or not. So that's the main difference between the two. And for non-controlled, usually you have just a single group and you want to study people before or after a particular intervention. So they are also called quasi-experimental trials. Now, clinical trials are more complicated than this. This is really a simplistic way of looking at them at this point. So different clinical trials can have different goals. For example, if you want to see whether a vaccine works, that is some sort of a preventive clinical trial, like what we had during COVID, where you give that particular vaccine to one group and you give something else, maybe a placebo or another usual vaccine in another group, that is a preventive trial. So there are different ways where we can classify. You can have a screening trial. So there are different ways we can classify, these clinical trials. So, but what I wanted to insist here was that, before drugs are given to people or authorized to be given to people, for example, paracetamol, for example, metformin used in diabetes, before medical devices, for example, if you're having a pace setter to be used, for your heart, or another medical device, for example, today in diabetes, people use continuous glucose monitoring, to measure the blood sugar in your blood continuously. Before all these are used, they typically will undergo a clinical trial to prove that they are effective and that they will not cause harm to humans. We know about ethical principles for anything in medicine and biomedicine. Do not cause harm, only cause good. Respect the people, which has to do with autonomy, and also justice. So core 4 ethical principles, these things have to go through. And I just wanted to hone on clinical trials here to say, before a particular new drug, comes, to be used in the hospital, for example, in the NHS, it would go through clinical trials, and these are the main phases of clinical trials. And these phases actually are answering these different questions. Is that medication or that lifestyle change going to be safe for the people? And what will be the right dose? If it works, what are the side effects? Is it better or is it more effective than already existing treatment? And if that new medication goes live, that is, it is sold, what would be the long-term effects within the population? So these are the different phases. And as you can see, I've added a preclinical phase, which is usually studies are first of all done in the laboratory to identify a lead molecule, and probably in animals that would go into, before going into clinical trials in humans. This is just a summary of the different clinical research approach that I've mentioned tonight. And as I said, these slides are going to be shared. I'm not going to come back to this. So just really to give you a picture of the main types of clinical studies or clinical research design. Now, one thing which is very important for people like, Chief who are into administration and policy is when we do all this research, does it really matter for people? How can we use the results and the findings, to be able to change either clinical practice or to change policy within the health system or within a country? And so this is what is a classical pyramidal picture of what we call evidence for from clinical research. And depending on the study or the type of studies that are done, you have a lower quality of evidence to a higher quality of evidence. As you can see, expert opinions, like myself, I am into diabetes research. I can say something, but it may not mean anything. That has to go through the scientific process. Remember, I talked about the scientific method. So, case reports, cross-sectional study, case control studies, cohort randomized control trials provide the highest evidence, but when we do systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized control trials, they produce the highest quality of evidence that can be used for effecting clinical change or changes in policy. One thing I just want to stress here, I'm removing this, is that many people go to ChatGPT, people go to YouTube videos, people have gut feelings whether they should do this or that. There are personal anecdotes out there, parental instincts. Oh, I need to give this to my child, because I feel this is no. These have not gone through the scientific process. And so we should be careful where we go to for information around things, especially things that we are going to put into our body as medicines and as drugs. Do not get your evidence for science from podcasters. Although I love Joe very much, I listen to him all the time. But get the real things from that have gone through the scientific process and the scientific method. And so today we're talking about how clinical research is important, but also participation. So people who participate in clinical research should do so voluntarily, and you must know that there are several steps today that have been put in place to protect the interests of whosoever participates in clinical research studies. And the two other speakers are really going to come back to this, so I'm not going to talk more. And that just say that clinical research is regulated by several institutions in the UK, in the US, in all other countries. In Cameroon, for example, there are institutions that regulate clinical research. And why is it important to talk about representation? Because we know, I've just looked, this is from UK data, for example, that the clinical research and particularly clinical trials that are being undertaken in the UK, the majority of participants come from the white ethnic group, so they are white Caucasians. Now, what this means is that whatever the benefits or the drugs or the medical devices or the lifestyle changes that are produced would probably be based on data generated from white Caucasian people. How that applies to Black Afro-Caribbeans, to Asian, would be tricky. I know Serge and also Dr. Valley would be coming back to this. I'm not going to talk any further on this, but just to say it is important for us, even as minority populations within the UK, to seek to participate in clinical research so that our voices will be counted. And I'm just going to end tonight by saying that when we participate in clinical research, these are some of the benefits that we are contributing to. We help in improving the way diseases are diagnosed, the way they are treated, and how they can be prevented. We help to ensure that the different things we get from the hospital, drugs, devices, are safe and effective because they go through this rigorous scientific process, and that whatever comes from clinical research also translates to patient benefits, strengthens policy and health system. And when different groups participate in clinical research, we help bridge the gap and reduce health inequalities. And clinical research is a main driver of innovation and economic growth. We can see that in Southeast Asia, for example, within the last 40 years, there's been a rapid growth of clinical research in medicine, but that has affected all other sectors in that part of the world. And that clinical research is important. When we participate, we help contribute to the development of new ways of treating different diseases. And so I'm just going to end tonight by saying that clinical research is an engine that drives medical innovation, but it can only work best when all populations are represented and should not be focused only on white Caucasian populations, for example. Thank you very much, and over to you, Chief.
Wow, wow, wow. I don't know about the rest of the audience, but fantastic scene setter, as you yourself you call it. Thank you so much, Dr. Jean-Claude Katte, for those who have just may have joined us while he was already talking. Our focus today is how to engage the Black minority ethnic community in medical research. So essentially, Jean-Claude has set the scene by telling us what really is clinical research. Now, we're going to keep the panelists join us when we have an open house Q&A. So please, as you're watching, leave your comments, your questions on the interactive platform in the chat room. We'll come to that when we come to Q&A. So this time, we want to make sure the other speakers also join in. They speak before we actually have an open house. But one burning issue, we are saying here that we're trying to persuade the Black community to join in research. Yeah, and you've now told us research is a formal and evidence-based approach to essentially show the effectiveness and safety of any potential intervention that they want to do on in the medical setting. So Jean-Claude, just quickly, I know we're going to move to others. What's the point doing it on humans? Why don't they do it in animals and stop troubling men and women? Why don't they just do it in animals?
Yes, so that is important. So remember, when I was situating where clinical research sits, there is also, I talked about basic research. So lots of research that is done in animals falls within that area of what is called fundamental research or basic research, or some people may call it preclinical research, especially when it comes to the development of lead molecules for drugs or for the pharmaceutical companies. Because they want to make sure that this thing works first in animals and to study the pathways, the targets, the receptors, for example, where this new molecule is going to work and make sure it's not lethal in animals. Once they study all that in animals, for example, then it moves from that preclinical phase or that fundamental phase to the clinical phase. I didn't want to insist on how the different phases of clinical research or clinical trials are done because this is not a clinical trial session. But first of all, if we have if a new molecule, for example, I discover a molecule, I don't know, from Genoa or from a tree in Cameroon, the back of a tree that we think can cure breast cancer. That has to first of all be tested in the lab, and then we can now try it in humans. And that like first phase of clinical trials and then go through all the phases.
Wonderful. I know we push for time because we have to bring in the others, and not only just to push for time, but also so that we get a more holistic picture of the topic before we have a proper debate. Personally, I'm grateful, and I hope the audience also finding you touched on ethics. And I suppose those who are, we talk about ethics, so for you, ethics is already defined as human rights, and the rights of animals don't matter. But we'll talk about that when we come to Q&A. So let's move on to the next bit, which is essentially we have Dr. Serge Engamba. Dr. Serge Engamba is a member of Cameroonian doctors in the UK. He's also a member of the Medical Council in Cameroon, the UK branch. Cameroon Medical Council, it has a UK branch, and Serge sits on that committee on behalf of CamDocUK, and he's the liaison person. But the word Serge is actually a general practitioner, in other words, a specialist consultant in the family medicine or community medicine. That's what GP means in the UK context. He's also a commercial research fellow at the University of Exeter, just like Jesse, who just spoke, also from the University of Exeter. He is a PCN research lead. I'm going to invite Dr. Serge Engamba, who is, I think he's accredited with the National Institute of Health Research. So I'm going to invite Dr. Engamba to actually take to the microphone. Serge, you've got a microphone.
Hello, Chief. Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind introduction. And thank you for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure talking about a topic that's dear to me. I was just saying that part of my research is actually quite operational, which is looking at encouraging colleagues in primary care to get involved in research. And part of that is indeed to look at the community element of it, which is making sure that there is inclusion and participation from all parts of the community into the research that we do. And I'll say a little bit about why. So today I'm talking about enhancing research participation in the Black community. I'll be touching about on research inclusion as a whole. And my talk would be a little bit less academic, sort of focusing more on research hesitancy in Black community and the reasons why there might be some hesitancy to get involved in research, why some people might feel reluctant to put their hand up for it. I will be talking about why participation is key, giving a couple of examples of where the lack of participation might have led to detrimental outcomes. And then I will finish by talking about the rights of research participants, just to reassure us that there are key safeguards for researchers and for participants before leaving the floor to Dr. Ngwa to look at those rights in more depth. So let me start with a story. This is Henrietta Lacks. So Henrietta was 31 in 1951 when she felt a bit of a stomach pain and started bleeding. So she went to Johns Hopkins Hospital. We're in the US here. And she was found to be in sort of later stage of a pregnancy, which she completed perfectly well, but she continued to have that same pain and the same bleeding even afterwards. So she went back and was sadly diagnosed with womb cancer. And while she was receiving her treatment for womb cancer, Henrietta's cells were collected and sent to a research center. So they were studied and they were found to be quite important cells in research throughout the decades that followed. And even until now, some of her cells are still used in the development of different drugs and different interventions within research. Interesting thing is, Henrietta didn't know anything about that. She wasn't told, she didn't consent to it. And whilst her cells were being sold for a huge amount of money between companies. Her family sadly was living in poverty, and she sadly died afterwards. So this is some of the stories that highlight issues of consent and problems that we've had with research governance in the past. I would say, luckily, these issues have led to significant changes in law, significant changes in the way that we conduct research. This is a statue of Henrietta today, sited at the University of Bristol. This was erected in 2021, just to highlight again that there's been huge changes and cancer research has to abide by significant stringent governance principles to make sure that research participants are protected. You can read about Henrietta online on the University of Bristol. I know that the WHO recognized this injustice to her and to her family in 2021, and there's been attempts at reparation. But these sort of things leave a stigma. Unfortunately, there's several studies like this and several incidences. I'll mention another one just to crystallize it in our mind. This is the infamous syphilis study. You might have heard about this. It is quite famous in when we talk about research and issues with research in the past. So these gentlemen here are in Tuskegee County in Alabama, United States. We're in 1932. And about 400 men were recruited to this study and were unfortunately allowed to have their condition and infection progress without treatment or without proper treatment just because they were enrolled in a study. And again, they were not aware of it. And by the time this came out to light and several things were done to redress the situation, unfortunately, some of them came to harm and including their families. Again, the flip side is that ethics law were reformed and reinforced as a result of this, both in the US and elsewhere. But again, when you hear of stories like this, it is hard not to understand why some people might feel a bit reluctant, to get engaged in research, thinking about these things that have happened in the past. So I thought I would define research hesitancy for us. So it's essentially the reluctance and uncertainty or refusal of some of us, either individuals or communities, to get involved in research. And that can happen even when research might have potential benefits for the person or for the community. So these things have happened in the past, and thankfully, we're hoping that research today, cannot fall in the same sort of issues. But that's not the only reason for research hesitancy. I've put here a list of other reasons. There's a lot of them. And you can see it's a busy slide. But if I could just draw your attention to the three red ones at the bottom here. So one of the reasons why people don't get involved in research is just simply that they don't know about it. If you're not aware of a study running around you, you are not going to put your hand for it. There is also limitations on the side of researchers and the research infrastructure, that perhaps the outreach is not enough and we're not doing enough to let people know about the research we do. Thankfully, this is also changing, and there's a lot being done so that everyone in the community is aware and included. There are practical barriers, simple things like time, cost, or access to those studies. I mean, if you're busy with work, with home, there's stresses with your family, you've got so many things on your plate, why would you, put your hand up to go and do an additional activity that might take up your time? So, practical barriers like that can prevent people, not just from the Black community, from anywhere, to get involved in research. Now, misinformation and myths are a big one, and I'm sure you would have all been exposed to this during the pandemic, where there were stories and a lot of information from different horizons, some of which not substantiated by evidence, and that led to quite a few people making decisions around either COVID vaccine or the COVID infection and how they protected themselves, which might have led to harm. So misinformation is a big one. And thankfully, again, nowadays, research evidence and evidence around, the practice of clinical medicine is out there. So you can find the evidence for yourself, and you can indeed have help to weigh it up. So I'll just focus on those three. Again, the slides will be available for you to have a look at the other ones. I try to keep the research focus here with some references for you if you wanted to look further into any of those reasons. But these are some of the reasons why people feel hesitant. I will have to say again, thankfully, that research in 2025 is significantly changed from the picture that I just painted. Nowadays, there are strict and very clear rules around ethics and around accountability from all parts, for those who organize research, for those who design research, and those who help to deliver it. It is very clear the principles they have to abide by. And all of this is done so that research participants, you and me, are protected if we decide to put our hand up for it. There is expectation of integrity and following certain values, which align with clinical values, which align with societal values when we're doing research. So thankfully, we are in an era where research is significantly safer, and therefore research is something that we should all consider getting engaged in. Beyond being safe, research nowadays is meant to center around you and me. So whether it is race or gender or disability, none of these things should be a barrier to get involved in research. And in fact, the design of research nowadays has to promote, it is a compulsory requirement for researchers to promote research inclusion, to make sure that everybody is represented in their studies. And this is why I put this up. I won't go into the HRA and what they do. My colleague, Dr. Ngwa, will be talking more specifically around the rules that are in place in the UK, particularly to protect research participants and make sure they are safe during a study. But research is meant to be centered around you. It's about things that matter to you, questions that you want answered, questions that are important to people who look after you, look after your health. And it is therefore people-centered, as it should be. Now, as a participant, if you ever put your hand up, you do have rights. I've spoken about laws, about guidelines. There are clear rights when you decide to get involved in research. And it's a simple things as the information that you're given about the research. You need to know exactly what the research is about, how much is required of you. It is entirely voluntary. If you do have any form of coercion or any form of push towards being involved, this is not good research. It's not what we expect. Another thing is that you can withdraw at any time. You do not even have to give a reason. If you decide to put your hand up today for a study and tomorrow you think, I'm not quite sure about this, you can withdraw at any time. And this is a right as a participant. You do have your information out there within the research study, but your privacy is ultimately protected. And safety, I go back to safety again, it is absolutely crucial that you feel safe while you're participating in research. So your experience should feel like this. I am a participant. The research I am in is respectful, safe, transparent, and empowering. Anything short of that, then it is not good quality. And thankfully, we are striving for this to be a standard across all research in the UK, and hopefully internationally this follows. Now, let me tell you a last story. This is a story about the pulse oximeter. I'm sure you would have seen this device before. So the device that goes on a finger and it measures how much oxygen might be in your blood. And there was a lot of this being distributed during the pandemic. Now, the reason I bring this up is because this device was designed around the 1970s and traveled up to the 80s and 90s. And at the time it was trialed, it was mostly on clear-skinned participants. So there was a very, very minority, maybe one or two participants with darker skin. Certainly not a lot of people of black descent were trialed on this. Now, fast forward from the 70s to 2000s, the pandemic hits and we all need pulse oximeters. And guess what? The pulse oximeters were giving false reading for black and those who have darker skins. And that meant that whilst you were going to the hospital, short of breath, distressed, a clinician could have put this on your finger and the readings would show that you're actually okay, but in reality, you're not. The only thing is, it's not reading properly because your skin is darker. And so many people came to harm just because of this. You can see the statistic there, 1 in 10 black patients incorrectly triaged during the COVID pandemic, just because at the time of the design of the device, the research that was done did not have everyone involved. Because if you had people with darker skin at the time we designed this device, we wouldn't have had this issue during the pandemic and some people wouldn't have come to harm. This just crystallizes how crucial and important it is for all of us to consider actively getting involved in research and putting our hand up. Because as my colleague was saying earlier, Dr. Katte, if we're not part of the research study, we will not be part of the result, and the results will not reflect who we are. And unfortunately, that might mean that we don't get the effectiveness and the full care that we might receive otherwise. So I've highlighted here some of the benefits of research inclusion, and essentially, as I say, is effectiveness and safer treatments, but crucially, reduction of health inequalities. It is important to still remember that even today, there are conditions that affect certain communities more than others. And in the Black community, we have issues with hypertension, diabetes, maternal mortality is still a problem, sickle cell disease. I know Chief is part of community that help to support patients in the arena. Certain cancers, prostate cancer is twice as likely in Black men than Caucasian men. So certain issues are so prevalent in our community that when we research those issues, if we're not participants, it is hard to get the results that would then help us ultimately. So to finish, representation is key. We can either decide to go one direction with representation and increase that equity in different conditions like diabetes and hypertension I mentioned earlier, getting a little bit more data, more trials and treatments that might help, or we can go without representation, and sadly that means poorer solutions for certain categories of the population. So I will want to entreat you, if I may, to think about research, go out there. I mean, I know Dr. Ngwa will be talking about how to get involved, but if you do have the opportunity, please do put your hand up. So finally, as we've seen, hesitancy is understandable. There's been issues in the past, and there are still issues even today in certain aspects of clinical care, which we haven't gone into. But as you can see with me, participation is absolutely crucial. It is powerful. You have rights as a participant, and those rights are clear, enshrined in law and guidelines. And the protections around you as a participant in 2025 are strong. My colleague will be going into those. So again, please do think about getting involved in research. Thank you.
Wow. Dr. Serge Engamba, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I'm just looking at the interactive panel. So thank you, Serge. This is wonderful. In fact, there are a lot of questions coming across already on the various interactive, in the Q&A and the chat, but I'm just pleading with everyone that we have an open house after the last speaker. We would then actually delve into all the key comments and questions that are actually coming through. But one burning question that is coming across for research at this stage is perhaps this is coming from Marie Claire. In a way, Marie Claire is in a way it cuts across the whole thing. What Marie Claire would like to know is, why don't you involve today? Why don't they involve the community, the Black community, at the design stage, rather than just recruiting them to take part in this trial? In other words, perhaps by involving them at that early stage, that might address the hesitancy issue. I know that might be something that my Dr. Ngwa want to consider when he comes to speak. But Serge, I think this is one key issue that let's tackle it at this stage. In other words, we're tackling hesitancy. If you want to tackle hesitancy, why don't involve me, that which is relevant to me at that design stage? That's the question for Marie Claire.
This is a very important question, and a question that's actually very dear to me, and it touches on three particular aspects of research. One of them is representation. You know, in the presentation there, I talked about representation in terms of different participants, different patients groups, getting involved in research. But there is still an issue with representation even amongst researchers, whereby you can see that amongst researchers, people look at the researchers and they don't see people that look like them. And that can be an issue indeed. So there is things being done for representation to increase, and hopefully that would help with hesitancy. But I think your question is more around, why are people not involved earlier on in the process? And there are mechanisms and structures for that. There's something called PPIE, which is patient participation, public participation, public and patient involvement and engagement in research. Sorry about that. And PPIE is a requirement for every research done in the UK. So you do have to involve the public and patients earlier on in the process, right from the research idea. And it's something that I do every day as a researcher. You speak to the population that has experience of whichever condition you want to research. And then you travel through your research journey with that population. And that means that if I'm researching the Black community, I will want to have the Black community along. If I research sickle cell, I need people with sickle cell. If I research diabetes, it is important to have people who have diabetes with me, because they are ultimately the experts. It's something called expert by experience, right? Because they've had the experience of actually living with a condition or a specific problem. They are the expert, and they can tell you best how to structure your disease, how to structure your design and your study. So there are mechanisms to involving you early. And if you put your hand up, you probably will be made aware of those mechanisms. I'll probably stop here so I don't take too much time.
Yes, yes, very important. Thank you very much the way you tackled that. We'll come to Q&A section, which will elaborate on this. I know that a gent, I don't know if it's a gentleman or a lady, Eben, takes that further and says perhaps hesitancy could be addressed by also designing the work in such a way, the research in such a way that you engage various populations, not just talking about the BME, the Black minority on the racial grounds, that you can design might be in such a way that is more inclusive. Those are things that we'll think about. Think about it, Serge, when we come to Q&A. Because I'm very
just want to say quickly, Chair, if you allow me.
Yes.
In fact, I mentioned 3 things there, but just 2. The last one was that it is now a requirement from the National Institute of Health and Social Care Research to have research inclusion highlighted in any study you bring forward and any grant application. This is only since the beginning of last year, where it is research inclusion is now mandatory. So again, it does feed into answering this question to say that we are now having a requirement to include every community, not just the Black community, and to make sure that every member of the community or of the society has a chance to be involved in our studies.
Fantastic. I must say the interactive platform is really hot. A lot of issues coming across and questions on to do with at what stage people might want to adverse events, but we'll come to that when we come to Q&A. I'll ask for everybody to just ask their forbearance. Please bear with us. Let us listen to all the speakers, and then we have a proper open house. The third speaker, so far we started with essentially what really clinical research is. We now came to address the hesitance, the whole issue of hesitance, and now we're going to the next session, which is going to address some of the issues that actually may also way back answer the previous 2 sessions done. So the 2 speakers have spoken so far. But let us come now to the issue about governance and related issues. And we have no one better than Dr. Valentine Ngwa. Dr. Valentine Ngwa is a consultant in elderly, a consultant at Mid Yorkshire. Let me just get this right. So Dr. Valentine Ngwa is actually a consultant. He's a member of CamDocUK, by the way. He's actually the immediate past lead for education at CamDocUK. He is a consultant at in Mid Yorkshire Hospital NHS Trust, consultant physician in elderly and acute medicine. He's a research lead for elderly medicine department. Through his role as research lead, he's therefore principal investigator for a whole range of research topics. So we can't get anyone more appropriate than our 3 speakers, and even more so Dr. Valentine Ngwa, who is actually coming on now to speak. So Dr. Ngwa, you've got the microphone.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Dr. Nkohkwo, and thanks for the for the kind introduction. Now, thanks again, and thanks everybody for attending. I do work as a clinician, so I'm in the hospital most of the time, but part of my time I do research as well. And I've been the principal investigator for quite a few research, both commercial and research funded by the NIHR, where my 2 previous speakers have a strong affiliation. And thanks Dr. Engamba and Dr. Katte for setting the stage for me. I think you've done quite a stellar presentations for introducing the community to what we're talking about. In the next, can you tell me my slides? I can't see my slides.
We can say outline.
Okay.
It's showing outline.
Yeah, great. Thank you. In the next 10 to 15 minutes, I will just try to talk about how to get involved in clinical trials and why we should get involved and what happens when the research ends. And quite a few people, so just give me 1 second. Gosh. Sorry, my slides are... Quite a few people tend to wonder what happens when the research ends and what happened to the information that they give. And so we will talk about all of those today. Now, there are a lot of ways we can get involved in research. And today I will talk about the 3 main ways, because most times when you talk about clinical research, many people imagine that you can only get involved as a research participant. That's one of the ways, and we'll talk about the other ones as well. Now, as a research participant, how can you get involved? Now, we've talked about the NIHR, which in the National Institute of Health and Care Research in the United Kingdom, they have a robust website where you can go in there, put the website on there, and you can click and it can tell you what researches are running around where you are or what condition you're interested in. And you can sign up to those. You can also speak to your local hospitals, particularly the tertiary hospitals, the teaching hospitals. Most times they run those clinical researches as well, and they can be able to signpost you for which one will be suitable for you. Your GP surgery is a fantastic, Serge Engamba is a GP or a family physician, and you can see that our GPs are very interested in research as well. So speaking to your GP surgery could be another fantastic way to get signed up to being research as a participant. And as we know in the United Kingdom, most all over the world anyway, many universities do run researches and many universities collaborate with hospitals to run research. In fact, one of the research that I'm one of the PIs in, it's a research that I'm collaborating with the University of Sheffield and the Yorkshire Ambulance Service. So getting to the university could also be another way in which you can become a participant in a research endeavor, as well as a lot of online platforms. What most research endeavors or platforms tend to do is they send out flyers and letters to either community groups, church groups, or anywhere where they think they can recruit participants from. So if you keep your eyes open, you can get most of those information through. Now, you can also become involved, and I'm going to take this quite a bit serious. You can really involve as a PPI group. I think Dr. Ngamba did make mention of that. What the PPI group? A PPI is the patient public involvement. Most times we tend to think that research is being done to us. No, it's not. It's done with us. And sometimes it's very important that we sit and at that table where those decisions are being made. Marie-Claire Kofi Mrs. Kofi did mention that why don't we start at the beginning of research? That's one thing the PPI group does. It looks at whether the research question is good enough, the methodologies that they're going to use are adequate for the community involved, while the whole research itself actually going to benefit the community. And it is very important that we get people in this group of diverse backgrounds who can be advocates, because this group is advocating for the people who are going to be participants in that group to make sure that the cultural sensitivity is taken into consideration. So we can also get involved in research by being members of a PPI group. And there are a lot of ways you can do that. The easiest way, is the website peopleinresearch.org. If you click on that website, it will give you a whole range of the kind of research that they want PPI members for. They will need, you don't have to be an expert in research, you don't have to be a medical person or a research person, but you just have to have an analytical mind. And as we know, it's very important that we have people on this group, we can see the world from different lenses. For example, as a Christian, I might see the world from the Christian perspective. As an African, I might see the world from an African perspective, which is very important that I bring that to bear when we design any research that's going to involve people of my community and put it on board. So being part of this is important. The NIHR can also be another source where you can get information. And there are many charities that you can get information on how to become, like the British Heart Foundation. As Dr. Ngamba did say, it is becoming a mandatory requirement nowadays to get a PPI involvement when you want to conduct research that you involve participants or human beings. And I think that I'm going to add that it is a mandatory requirement. The regulator says it anyway, you need to get people from different backgrounds also involved. I think those of us from the Black community need to take that as a priority, that will become the members who also sit on the table when we have those conversations, so that the research that is done is not just done to us, it's done with us, with our participation. And the next thing you can become involved is an ethics committee member. Now, the ethics committee is a bit different from the PPI. The ethics committee makes sure that the participants' rights are being respected, their safety is assured, their well-being is maintained, and their dignity is respected. And so they're quite involved in asking deep-seated questions to make sure that the research sponsor or the research people run the research are meeting all these criteria. As Dr. Ngamba has said, safety is a very important issue. So gone were the days where these things were not looked upon when the research was being done and harm was committed onto a section of the population. You can join by clicking on that link I just put there, step forward to become a REC member. REC is Research Ethics Committee. And you do not have to be a medical person or a researcher. Of course, they want people from that category to be in that committee, but you can also be a lay member and become a member of an ethics committee. Adequate training is provided. Some recs tend to give some, I don't want to call it salary, but they give something to offset people's expenses, meals and childcare and sometimes even lost wages. But it's very important that our community doesn't only see research as if they're going to be research participants, but see research as they can also be involved in how the research is designed and how people like them could be protected. Because when you do that, and when the participants know that people like them sat on that table to determine how the participants were respected, how the cultural specificities were taken into account, it gives that confidence to get involved in those clinical research. Now, why should you get involved in research? Again, Dr. Katte did say why research is very important. But here I'm talking about why should we get involved as members of the Black community, because it's very important. As my colleagues have said before, it is important that the medication that we're going to, or whatever result we're going to come, has a generalizability. So it can span across the different sectors of the population. But we do differ in the biology and the genetic factors. And to this, I will add that we do differ even based on the epigenetic factors. I have a particular interest in the sociological aspect of healthcare because I think that's not been taken in enough. And I think we talked about that a lot during COVID. And I think that one of the last webinars, Dr. Bello did mention about the weathering hypothesis as well, which means, therefore, that people who are living, people in a racialized community like us, living in a society that has got issues with stereotype and racism, would tend to manifest diseases that, if you're not careful, could be labeled as being they are genetically predisposed. As you'll be hearing nowadays, they were genetically predisposed to hypertension, diabetes, and cancers. But if you look at all those things, you'll find out that they are inflammatory diseases. And what this weathering hypothesis is telling us is that when you are under those persistent stress, you're more likely to develop those kind of inflammatory diseases. And I want to think the hypothesis here is that this could be the reason why we are facing this a lot in our community, but that can only be proven with adequate research. And that's why we have to get involved as well, because it's important that we know what works for us. I'll give another example. When you are diagnosed with diabetes, for example, the first thing they do is to give you a dietary management. Now, those dietary managements most times will be done on people who have a different kind of coronary tendency or different appetite or different tastes. So you can imagine somebody who's been living on watafufu and arrow and kati, and then the next day you tell them to eat broccoli and cauliflower. Then you're just saying that that intervention is going to fail. because that dietary management was not done with their cultural sensitivity. And that's quite important that we get involved as well to make sure that whatever is being advocated takes our specificities into consideration. And of course, Dr. Ngamba has mentioned about the ethical and social justice of equity. It's not just equality, doing everything for the same, everybody the same, but doing everything based on our specification. Because whether we like it or not, we have a specification that has to be respected in how we manage our situation. And of course, guidelines are being thrown on every day. And one thing that has anybody who is in research has noticed that guidelines have moved into qualitative guidelines. Qualitative research have been involved in guidelines nowadays. And what they try to do in qualitative research is not just the numbers in quantitative research, but also an understanding of who we're dealing with. And when we get involved in those things, then understanding of who we are will become part of those guidelines and very important because it will determine how we're being managed going forward and what policies are in place. And I'm going to talk about the regulatory pressures as well. Dr. Ngamba did mention that. It is now mandatory that when you're running a clinical trial, you have to involve people of different ethnic backgrounds to give it the generalizability that we'll be talking about. And also, when you become involved in clinical trials, either as a PPI member or as an ethics committee member, it gives that research a lot of relevance and equity, which I've talked about. But most importantly, it gives trust to our community. When we know that the people who are making those decisions are people like us, understand how we are, understand how we live, and then we're going to make decisions in our best interest, they tend to participate in that research more. So it's quite important that we don't only involve ourselves as participants, but also as the people who will be involved in determining how the participants are being treated. And it gives quality to it as well and a greater impact because, as I said before, the results can now be used widespread. So when you have gone through those clinical trials, you've been I want to focus on clinical trials, part of clinical research now, and you've gone through that and it stops, it comes to an end. What happens? Now, there was a video I watched back in 2013 by a prominent Cameroonian physician, Dr. Titangi, Dr. Titangi in Cameroon, who lamented the fact that in Cameroon, people get into clinical trials, and then when the trial ends, they're just being neglected. And I think that's something we need to understand, that it is, well, in the UK sense, it's still wrong, because after the trial ends, a lot of things still happens. The first is, as through the trials, you always have the opportunity of asking questions. You're always going to have the opportunity of asking questions as well. But most importantly, they're going to be health checked after the trial ends, and then even do the follow-up period. You're going to be followed up for as many years as was determined in the beginning of the trial. And the clinical team that you've been involved. So for example, if I'm treating a patient with diabetes, and then there's a trial involving a new medication for diabetes, and I put them in that trial, after the trial ends, before the trial ends, at the middle, they would have been able to understand whether the drug was doing good or not good for the patient. After the trial ends, the discussion I have with the patients will be whether we continue with the what you've been on, we change it to this new medication, it's been shown to have better benefit. Or if you think that you want to stop treatment at the moment, I have a thing. So, but there are various options in which you would have with your ongoing treating team. And in this situation, I always advise patients to be able to talk to people with advocacy tendency. And I'm sure CamDoc seems to be one of those groups that has that advocacy as well, to advise on what the best way to go, or suggest on what the best way to go. Now, when these results are available of these trials, all the participants will be informed of what the results were, because there's always a layperson summary, and the PPI comes into this very strongly, to make sure that the wordings of this lay people's summary is such a way that everybody in the community can read it and understand what the results were. But rest assured that your care and most importantly, your safety will always be assured all through this process, even after the trial ends. So when you get into a study, of course, we collect data. We collect your name, your date of birth, your age, your NHS number. We collect what disease you have, what medications you have. Those are patient identifiable data. There are strict regulations in the United Kingdom, and well, most countries actually, on how this data is handled, because many people worry, well, if I give my information, it's going to be out there, and people might see it out there and know who I am. And I'm sure sometimes we've heard some gory stories in Cameroon whereby people have gone to buy pop-off and they've wrapped the pop-off with the medical bulletin of a patient and stuff like that, which I'm hoping that I'm hoping it's no longer the case anyway. And I'm hoping that we will be able to work together to make things that those data are quite very important. But here in what we tend to do here with this data is when we collect them, we first of all pseudonymize them. We make sure that we give it a code so nobody can identify your name. And then we cannot anonymize those data. So rather than putting a code, your date of birth, your address, they might just put your age, your sex, and your ethnic background. So even somebody looks at those data, they might not link it to you. It's very important because there's a whole team called the data management team that looks into this very strongly. These are all protected by strong regulations. In the United Kingdom, we have the GDPR and the Data Protection Act. And we know if you go against any of them, the fines can be very hefty. I mean, people who rent out houses know that they have to register with the Information Commissioner because you're collecting data of your clients or the tenants. And so you have to make sure that you abide by the rules of protecting them. They will tell you at the beginning of the trial what they're going to use your data to, how it's going to be stored, how long for, who has access to it, and whether it can be used for future research. So before you give the consent process, which is going to be an informed consent, you would have gone through all of these processes. Some trials will keep a data for 10 years, some for 25 years. It depends on the trial. But they're stored in a very secured environment, and if there's any breach, you have to be informed. Very few people with the appropriate amount of clearance will have access to it. And when that period ends, you will give it consent that that data will be destroyed unless it has to be used for further research, in which case they'll anonymize it. So what I'm saying here, therefore, is the information that you provide about yourself is highly protected and unlikely to be used to identify who you were, who participated in the research. So what's the take-home message nowadays? After knowing all this, and I know we had a lot of these complaints during COVID, oh, you are trying to use us as guinea pigs, oh, you are trying, there is no space to sit back and complain. We have the capacity to get on board and sit at various levels to determine how research is done with us. Because that research that has been done with us has a lot of advantages to us. How we are treated, how our diseases are managed, how we're being diagnosed. Nowadays, we're hearing that you should screen Black people for prostate cancer more earlier than the Caucasian. Is because of research. So we have to get involved in those things and understanding that there are strict guidelines and there's ample opportunity to seek redress. And as my colleague Dr. Ngamba has emphasized, whenever you're not happy, you can pull off without giving any reason why you're pulling off, and you'll be respected. And also, if you want your data erased, you have a right to do that. I'll end here by putting this slide above from Dr. Ngamba. Thank you so much. But this is how you can link up to the NIHR if you want to participate in any of the trials. Just scan that QR code, and it will take you to their website, and you can sign up. Thank you very much, and I'll take any questions.
Fantastic, Dr. Ngwa. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience, for your joining us. What is I hope is coming across to you as well. A very exciting webinar we're having today on looking at how to engage the Black community in research. Now, Dr. Ngwa, so far we had Dr. Jean-Claude Katte focused on the basics, essentially the essence, what research is, clinical research. Dr. Serge Engamba focused on hesitance. Why is it that there's so much hesitance come across reported in the Black community? We've had now Dr. Ngwa focusing on the governance and on related aspects. Just to reassure, we want to make sure that CamDocUK engaging all our stakeholdership, wants them to understand that research is there to address problems, to address medical challenges, and we are there to help support, inform to our stakeholdership to understand that it has to be safe, it has to be effective, and it has to be well led. And this is what this seminar today has actually hopefully comes across to you. That is what the speakers have been saying. But Dr. Ngwa, you raised an issue before we come to the open house. One burning issue which came across, I was taking some notes here. By the way, the interactive panel is really hot with questions. And the one key thing here is focusing on the post-clinical trial, the management of the data. We'll come to other aspects, but let's take a deep dive into the Tuskegee experiment that Dr. Engamba mentioned, because this is one lingering issue which up until today, as you mentioned yourself during COVID, our stakeholdership were reluctant to get involved in vaccines and all that. So given that you're actually on top of the whole design and governance and all that, how can you, any reassurance you can give to say that a Tuskegee will not happen, thing will not happen today? Maybe you might want to remind people what the Tuskegee experiment was, which Serge mentioned, so that we can then see whether to reassure people that the situation now in such a way that with proper compliance, it shouldn't happen. What is it in place that stops us from thinking that as a Black person, that I shouldn't be hesitating? Because that is what is always used to come across a lot 5 years ago during the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, you're right. I think, as Dr. Ngamba did say, it was a study done on patients with syphilis, and they were not being told that they were not getting appropriate management for the syphilis, because the research participants, their interest was to see how syphilis manifests in people. Now, I don't think that there's anything as bad as it can ever be. I try not to think that you could have such a thing happening today, but the reason being, the regulatory bodies in place are so clear on what you can do, but not just that. Let's say there's going to be a complicity, but if you get people like you in that meeting, in that board, then I'm sure it's going to be very hard to have a complicity against a particular group, because they're going to be able to flag it up and say, hang on, why is there a disproportionate bias in the way you are dealing with people of this particular ethnicity? And that's why I sincerely think that we should not only get involved in research as participants, we should also get involved in research as stakeholders. As I think Dr. Katte said that when people during COVID were realizing that those that were advocating and doing the vaccines were people like them, it gave them some trust. And when you get researchers who are like you, it gives you that trust. But also when you get people sitting on that high table like you, it also gives you that trust. So it all boils down to trust. I don't see any ethics committee nowadays who will be able to sanction any trial like the Tuskegee trial. I think unless the world is coming to an end, to be honest, I don't think I could see that. And that's the more reason why it is being used through every platform as a means to say, you know what, research community cocked up very badly and this should never happen again. If you want to get involved in research, there's a course you do called the good clinical practice, which try to run through all those things. There are a lot of regulations we're not talked about here. The Human Tissue Act, you know, there are lots of them, but the stringent regulations are very high that it'd be very hard to get that kind of a research pass on nowadays.
We're going to go to the open house session, but I was just going to say that people will be wondering why Chief is wearing this today. This is related. This is Movember, the month of November, which is essentially topical. It's when they want to engage. It is the UK speak for engaging the Black community and involving in specifically to do with research that relate to men's health. So Movember is that month. So that's I'm wearing this. I don't remember the last time I played football. So even though I'm a supporter of Chelsea. But anyway, relating to this particular issue, just for point of clarification before we go into the open house, Dr. Ngwa, our audience today is not just UK. The QR code you showed there was NHS, the number of things. So how do we, any information on the scene in Cameroon, those who are watching this from Cameroon, what reassurance can we give them in participating in research in Cameroon? Or maybe either you or any other member of the panel, maybe Jean-Claude.
I'm start maybe some other person can because maybe my knowledge of Cameroon is a bit archaic. I'm getting a bit old now. I have had this conversation. I belong to a forum, Cameroon Doctors Forum, where there are a lot of Cameroonians in Cameroon. And I've thrown this question to them. The reason why I threw that question, because we know of the tenofovir trial, which was a trial that they were giving tenofovir to patients to prevent them from getting HIV. And they were using mostly prostitutes and giving them this medication, but they were not adequate safeguard up until this organization called Actor Paris flagged up and that trial was stopped. And the principal investigator for that trial in Cameroon was a professor of gynecology in Cameroon. And so my question there, and again, with the presentation that Dr. Tichan did this give us, were still lamenting on those issues. So my question to them was, where is the place of the ethical committee when so much unethical research is being done in our society? And could somebody who is involved in those things give me an understanding that things have moved forward? I can't say to you with confidence that I've got a very straight answer at the moment. And I'm just hoping that somebody who knows Cameroon better will be able to enlighten me that things have moved forward. But from where I stood, which is going back many years, many studies were being done unethically. Let's give an example. As I said in my presentation, when you do a drug trial on the condition, say for example, you got somebody with diabetes and they're on this standard medication, and you come with a new medication and you give them this new medication, and then it's been shown after a trial that this new medication actually works better than the one that is the standard treatment. They have a right to be put on that new medication. But what the ethics committee in most trials in Cameroon were doing is they will put them back on what they call the standard treatment in Cameroon. And what is the standard treatment in Cameroon is very varied, because your standard treatment could be depending on how much money you have. If you're a poor person in Bello, your standard treatment could be nothing. So those are the things in which we need to seek clarification, not as a means to condemn, but as a means to collaborate so that we can be able to design those things better. And I'm sure as CamDoc has this open tendency to collaborate, I'm sure that's going to be the way forward. How we collaborate with our researchers back home so that when drug trials are being done, they are being done to standards that are acceptable in sane societies.
Wonderful. I don't know if Serge or Dr. Engamba or Dr. Katte would like to add anything to what Dr. Ngwa just said regarding we are looking at essentially involving our audience onto this webinar who are actually joining us from Cameroon, so that this is not just a UK centric. It's a key issue during the COVID period. We remember the hesitance that we faced right across Africa and Cameroon in particular. In engaging with the therapy that was being offered at the time, partly because of this issue of hesitance. They've not been. I think let me just leave it to Serge. Would you like to say something about this?
Oh, yes, absolutely, Chief. Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think Dr. Ngwa has covered most of it. One thing I would like to highlight, though, is the fact that research is ultimately centered around the communities that have the issues you want to solve. And you can see during the pandemic that vaccines were coming from different parts of the world. You had vaccines from China and from America and from here and from Russia. So everyone was trying to design something that fitted with their community and with their population. And I think that's probably something that's still lacking, not just in Cameroon, but to sort of Africa at large. It's something that we can develop a little bit more. If you remember at the start of the pandemic, there were some assumptions that the toll in equatorial areas was going to be quite high, and we were surprised that that toll wasn't as high for many reasons. So there's many speculations around it. But what I believe is key is that we need research that is starting from back home for populations back home, with both our clinical researchers being, based there. I know, like Dr. Ngwa, we are part of different groups of colleagues back home who are doing amazing jobs and who have the know-how and sometimes just lack the resources to do the research. So it is important that we advocate for research being properly funded so that it is reflective of the population that it's supposed to serve. And we can do that in Cameroon these days. We just need to continue to push for it.
And excellent. I know we're going to come to Dr. Katte, but I just want to say that it was not for nothing that I was suggesting that Dr. Engamba should go ahead. For those who are joining us, who joined us late, Dr. Engamba is actually on the Cameroon Medical Council UK branch. This is the professional body, regulatory body of the medical practice in Cameroon. And the UK branch, Dr. Serge sits on it as a liaison person. I said it because during the pandemic, CamDocUK, as we always try to innovate, we came up with an idea of something called CEMED, Center of Excellence for Medical Development, CEMED. Perhaps it's a time for us, we actually put out a position statement on that as a way of enhancing the involvement of local expertise in the development of medicines in Cameroon. We're not trying to be patronizing. We don't underestimate what the country is doing. Perhaps just to flag that up again and remind Serge in that heart of a CMC Cameroon to think about, as you rightly said, advocacy. Take that with your colleagues at the CMC in Cameroon. Let them remember that this is some of the areas that we want to try and engage more of Cameroonians to get involved proactively in this, in the issue of research, medical research. Dr. Katte, did you want to comment on this? I must say that the interactive platform is buzzing. There's a lot of questions there, but it was just of a point of clarification. This is one governance area which I thought it was important that we actually address. Jean-Claude.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chief. I think what I'm going to say is that the ethical landscape for clinical research in Cameroon has evolved a lot, and towards the right direction. As most of you would know, Cameroon is a very research intensive country, depending on what type of research you want to look at it. Whether from clinical research to implementation, style research. A lot happening across the board, whether from infectious disease, mostly in infectious diseases, as of course we would know, a little less in non-communicable diseases, for example. So a lot has improved, a lot has changed. We know there've recently been the restructuring of the National Ethics Committee, and and also not only that at the national level, but also I would say the democratization of that institution into the different regional headquarters, where we have regional boards for ethics to look at what is happening within the different regions of the country. But not only that, there are other I would say, public institution research bodies that do exist in the country. I would not want to name specific ones, but they do exist. And we know most institutions now are also being encouraged to set up institutional review boards, whether at university level or whether at university teaching hospital level. And at times, if you go into platforms where they enumerate all these things, most of them are there. But in terms of the functionality of some of these other research institutional review boards, some of them have been set up, but not yet very functional. But at least from the national level, there is the national board, which has been restructured, and now also that has been democratized or decentralized into the different 10 regions at the delegation of public health within the different 10 regions of the country to kind of, bring that research integrity closer to the population, but also closest to researchers carrying research, whether in hospital or in communities or within the universities. So I just wanted to point, and of course, there's a lot that can be done, but it's still work in process, and it's not where it used to be. I would say 20 years ago, for example, a lot has changed.
Wonderful, Jean-Claude. Can I just say that I think while I have you on the microphone, it's important that, like I said, the interactive platforms are really the platforms are hot with comments and questions coming through. This one is particularly relevant to you, Jean-Claude, because you did the scene setter about research. For those who join us, we're looking at why and how and the hesitance issues. Now, the question from, I think it's from Eben, it says, what's a potential risk or drawback for participants involved in clinical studies, particularly those testing new or experimental treatment? You remember when you spoke on clinical trial, you give just an outline. Here is somebody who would like a bit of clarification on the potential risk or drawbacks for participants involved in clinical research trial, because these are some of the things that anyone who is not so sure whether they should get involved or not, they'll be thinking about this kind of thing. What reassurance can you give? I know we've spoken about governance, we've spoken about the right issues, but essentially somebody's talking about clinical trial here, perhaps.
Yeah. So this is a tough one, I would say, because when something is new, it also carries the notion that we do not have sufficient information around the efficacy, but also about the safety of that therapy, of that treatment. And we know those are the two key things that are usually, first of all, addressed within the phases, the initial first two phases of a clinical trial. And when new treatments and new therapies are usually tested, for example, I'll go into oncology or cancer therapy and cancer research, where, across the board, cancer research produces the highest innovation in clinical research. And that's where new therapies are usually tested. What would usually happen? Someone maybe presents with a rare form of a cancer that currently does not have any known treatment. And, researchers would usually show up and say, oh, we are working on this. We have a lead molecule that we think some people, and so there at that level, most people do sign up because probably they have been told by their physician that, there's nothing left to be done. And so what is left? If that person, still has some motivation to live, then they would be like, okay, why not try a new therapy? Why not try a completely new therapy? Even if it, they can say it has a 40% or 50% efficacy margin. That's one. When the COVID vaccines came, even the very first studies showed that the efficacy margin were around 70, 80% before they were improved to about 90%. So when people present this information to I would say patients or the people who are in need, and it's left for you to decide. And what people should know is that never feel compelled by a researcher to want to take part in a study. It has to be voluntary. And if you decide that you don't want to, then you can easily withdraw and step away. But It's a personal decision. It is important for each and everyone to be involved. I myself, I'm a researcher. At times I do participate in research for others. For example, in Exeter here, we are trying to improve representativeness of, Black Afro-Caribbeans in some of our research studies or as control participants. And we are all working with other people to try and present ourselves, as participants in that endeavor. So for new therapy, it can be tough, but usually people who are at that stage, usually they are the ones who would make a decision to go for such really completely new therapies. Excellent.
And just to point out that the duty of care means that even if the client, the subject withdraws from the study, if they happen to be a patient, the duty of care means that they will still be looked after properly. The fact that they withdraw doesn't mean that they get them treated differently. They will remove from that trial, but their normal treatment will continue because the doctors have duty of care for them. And I think while at this, before I'm going to come back to the others, but it's very important because there's a deep dive coming into this particular area. Then you now have a situation where they've taken part in research. I think it's Marie Claire again. They've taken part in research and then they've come up with some new intervention, new treatment, and then hey, down the road, they withdraw that treatment with frustration to those who took part in it. So what really are the factors that could lead to? Because these are some of the issues people feel like, what's the point? So Jean-Claude, what are some of the factors that might mean that this novel treatment, I don't know, maybe your colleagues, the other speakers can actually dive into this, but it's one of the areas that it discourages people from getting involved in. Not only because they don't take seriously what matters to them, but even more so when they get involved in it, typically like a sickle cell, the research, and then you hear new treatment, suddenly all the treatment has been abandoned after all that trouble. So what are the factors that could typically lead to some of these things? I suppose we're talking about the phase 4 clinical trial, and that some of the findings might mean that that treatment actually is taken out of the market, taken back on the market. So Jean-Claude, do you want to throw some light on that?
Yeah, Chief, I think you've asked and answered it in one way or the other. in one way, because as mentioned, a new therapy or a new drug or something, or an old drug which is repurposed for something new, for a new indication, for example, it goes through those phases, and at the point, there's what is usually termed post-marketing surveillance or monitoring. And for one reason or the other, certain therapies can be withdrawn, maybe because they find out that the side effects profile, or when that is rolled out massively within the population, is just so large, and there is really no need to continue. And as you say, this can really hurt people who have been on that therapy for a number of years. It can also hurt people who maybe participated in the first 3 phases of the clinical trials, and it can hurt their confidence in participating in future clinical research. And unfortunately, these are things that do happen. There's a drug that I'm just trying to remember in my head while in the days of medical school. I'm sure most of the older doctors here would know it, Mediator. I don't know, Dr. Ngwa, the whole Mediator saga. I think that played so much in France, if I'm not mistaken. It was an anti-diabetic drug, for example. And, so it happens, but I believe that is why today, when we look at the regulations or before medications are approved, it's getting stricter and stricter, whether with regards to the preclinical phase where those lead molecules are identified. And if Dr. Marfo was here, I'm sure she would give us a precise percentage of drug attrition in that phase is very high. Pharmaceutical companies, people go through about 20 years of research and that is abandoned. So very, very few molecules seed into clinical phases and clinical trials. And so there's a lot that happens. So when it gets into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, then there is a very strong chance nowadays that it would go through and will be well tolerated in phase 4. But it can also happen that it fails in phase 4, and then it is required to be taken off the market, unfortunately.
So this is a very enlightening we're hearing. But Serge, one of the questions, somebody wanted to find out a quick one. What is the update on the oximeter? You spoke about the fact that oximeters don't seem to, they give false reading on Black people. Has that actually been addressed? Somebody wanted to find out, wanted to know.
Yes, thank you, Chief. Yeah, this is really important. I think I didn't say the end of that story, which is quite important to say, isn't it? Yes, no, these have been addressed, not just in the UK, but internationally. The testing was made mandatory to have at least 15% of Black participants. And a lot of the new ones, the new waves of oximeters, all have been retested, so they are more accurate now. But it's still an issue because if you have an oximeter that predates the pandemic and that you've kept at home for 5 years, might still not be as accurate. But the problem is simple, is that the oximeter works through light. So it produces a light. If you've ever seen one, it has a little red light that comes in and touches your finger and assesses the amount of oxygen based on that interaction between the light and inside of your skin. And obviously, if you have a darker skin, there's not enough penetration of that light. And that means that the oximeter might say that your oxygen levels are fine when actually they are not, just because it's not been able to read properly what your actual sort of interaction with the light is. So if you have a new oximeter, it should be calibrated properly now. But if you have one that is old, a few years old, then you might want to have another check on it.
Wow, immaculate launch. I hope you've gotten a response there. That's you're very keen to keep us on our toes to make sure that we actually look into that particular discrepancy issue. Serge has addressed it. Now, there are more and more questions coming onto the system. Can I just ask a general question? Perhaps because this webinar is about engaging, how to engage our community in the clinical research. Now, those who have been following the CamDoc webinars over the years will realize that in recent times, we too are also thinking about this new development called AI. So what's the point of research when AI has the answers to everything nowadays? What's the point of research? AI can answer anything. So spare us the Black folks, leave us alone, just get the AI to answer. Dr. Ngwa, any comments?
There has to be the AI/human interaction for it to work. Because its brain is what we have fed it into it. It's very important in research, but it also needs that human interaction with it to be able to give you the output that you do desire. So I see it as an innovation to assist us to do things quicker, but not as a replacement to the things that we do with our human brain.
Any other comment from Serge, Jean-Claude?
Well, I would say that AI is still learning a lot, right, before it's going to replace us effectively one day. So at the moment, as Dr. Ngwa said, that human AI interface is very important because AI would usually spur out, what it has taken in. So AI is going to be very important for research and also for clinical care. I think within the next, it's already happening, in our day today, but more so as we go on. But nonetheless, clinicians should be able to, not only clinicians, patient groups, civil advocacy groups for research, whether in the UK or the rest of the world, they really need to be coming together more and more to set the research agenda and to drive the research and to drive the change that comes from the research before AI takes everything or takes over everything. for now, we need our human brains, and we need people to collect data. We need people to monitor. We need people to read protocols. We need people to sit. I don't know if AI is going to go and sit in a research ethics committee now. I don't know. But, we need people in all these different institutions that we have all mentioned. And so, yes, as researchers, we can now use AI as part of either writing or delivering research rapidly in collaboration with, patients, participants, clients. So that's how I believe that AI can be used, now, and maybe we're going to get more intelligent and more innovative as we go forward with our research.
Serge?
Yes, I completely agree with that. Thank you, Jose. I think AI has its place in research, and there are different places, like you were saying about reading, analyzing data, and learning from the data that already exists. AI has its place there. I struggle to see how AI, either now or even in the future, will be able to replace a proper research participant, because AI uses the data that is available. And if we stop feeding it data because people stop giving the data, then we come to a place where we're relying on AI predictions. And even if we have those predictions, we still have to validate it on humans. Imagine you have a new tablet and AI says this is likely to work with a minimal amount of side effects because A, Y, and Z. You still have to try it on somebody to make sure that it actually works and that the person doesn't get the side effects, that the person accepts the new treatment, that the person's happy with it, and that actually works in the condition. So there is always going to be a phase after all of your AI predictions, after all of your AI analysis, where you actually need to move on to act to help people, to help real people. And you want to make sure at that phase that you do some amount of trialing. So maybe research will look different, but I struggle to see that research would happen without real participants. And there's also the level of accountability I was talking about in my presentation. So someone needs to take accountability for what AI does, and that needs to be a real human. If things go wrong, someone needs to be responsible, and AI certainly can take that responsibility, whether in the clinical realm or the research realm. So these things are quite important to take into account. So definitely AI is important, make it more streamlined, but I don't think we can get rid of research participants now or in the foreseeable future.
Wonderful. I think let me just point out that the interactive panels, Severin, Sue, we got very helpful comments. You said that the session is insightful, and particularly delighted about the emphasis placed on data protection and privacy, which is actually governance, which Dr. Ngwa was talking about. The average Cameroonian will be interested on the impact of research in the daily lives. A lot of sensitization is required in this area. We've got Serge there who sits on the CMC, Cameroon Medical Council liaison between UK and in Cameroon. And we want to reassure those who are also joining us from outside the UK that, and even those within the UK, these webinars are usually edited just within the governance policy of CamDocUK and loaded onto various platforms. So what I'm saying here is this session is just meant for 2 hours. We've gone on for 2 hours. We're thinking about wrapping up, but it's important that we reassure everyone that this will be recorded. It will then be placed on our website, CamDocUK.org. It will be on YouTube, on various other platforms, and it's going to be circulated to universities in Cameroon, like what we've been doing. We started doing recently when we found out that they're actually taking interest in our webinars. Just to reassure everyone. Now, but we haven't finished yet. We know we'll ask for your forbearance because the more and more questions are coming through. But even before that, it's important that I remind also, before you log out, please, we'll trouble you to try and answer, give us some feedback. There's a questionnaire which is being completed. Severin, don't forget to do what you just done there in the Q&A platform, and also in the interactive platform. Dr. Linda Bello and the background team, they've been putting a lot of resource, a lot of information as to websites that people can actually access to. Those who are interested in getting involved in medical research, the QR system that Dr. Ngwa mentioned, and so just keep bear with us. just about at the point where let me just invite a couple of people to make a comment. Dr. Bello, are you still there? Please, before you go for your tea, we would like you to make a comment, a statement as the chairperson of CamDocUK.
Hello, good evening. Good evening. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. It's really been an enriching discussion. Thanks to Dr. Serge, Dr. DC, Dr. Nkohkwo. This conversation has really reminded us how vital representation is in research and how much protection and support exists for participants. So it's been really useful to that as well. And basically, it has shown that, I think a lot of people don't realize that each of us can play a meaningful role in shaping the evidence that guides our healthcare. So a special thank you to everyone who logged in today, who asked questions, who's completed the survey. If you're not here, we're not going to be able to put our message across. So, and for those of you who came in halfway through, look at it on our youtube.org, CamDocUK.org is all there. So on behalf of CamDocUK, I really appreciate the fact that you were here. We look forward to welcoming you on the next edition of Talking with the Community. And also next Sunday, we have our mentorship webinars that are taking place. Those take place at the end of every month. So have a wonderful evening and thank you so much for being part of our community.
Can I just quickly thank Madam Chair that we say in this, when the chair speaks, it's meant to be the end of the session, but it is, because this session is so hot and interactive, it's important that I may have skipped some of the key burning questions, but I'm just asking to give us a few more minutes. And at this point, it is at that point of the webinar where I invite my co-moderator, Dr. Annah Mbene Ngah, because she's been monitoring the interactive panels. Dr. Annah Mbene Ngah, there must be a few things that I've actually skipped. Would you want to introduce yourself and then do the final session for us? And just to mention to those who may not be aware, we've had Dr. Valentine Ngwa, who is the consultant in the elderly care medicine and lead physician, does research and principal investigator at Yorkshire NHS in the UK. We've also had Dr. Serge Engamba, who is a general practitioner, but is also a research physician, commercial research physician based in Norwich in the east part of UK, but also attached to the University of Exeter, and is member of the National Institute, accredited by the National Institute of Health Research. We had the dynamic young doctor, Jean-Claude Katte, my royal colleague from Bazoo, who has spoken, who is an expert on diabetes. So at this point, while I want to pass over to my co-moderator to make sure that I've actually addressed all the questions, which are burning questions before we actually close down. Dr. Annah Mbene Ngah, you've got the microphone.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining this webinar. It's been an amazing session, even for me. Very inspiring and a lot of discovery. There is a question actually that I would like Dr. Valentine Ngwa to answer, because I would like to know the answer for that also. And this question is from one of the attendees, Eben. So it says, how are vulnerable populations, such as children or those with cognitive impairments, protected in research studies? And secondly, what are the procedures for reporting and addressing adverse events or breaches of confidentiality? Dr. Valentine,
Right, okay.
Can you enlighten us on that?
Thank you. Vulnerable people and minors are a special category in clinical research. Now, if you're doing a clinical research that involves vulnerable people, you only recruit them if that particular research you're doing is specific to their condition, otherwise you don't. The reason being, the issue of consent is very, very vital. They have to understand what they're consenting to. So if they've got any intellectual mental impairment and cannot understand the consent process, and you've been able to identify that they actually are necessary. So for example, you're doing a research on, say, dementia patients, then there has to be an advocate who would be able to do that consenting on their behalf. And that could be quite a whole list. There's a whole hierarchy. It could be a next of kin. It could be somebody with power of attorney. If somebody has the power of attorney, that's even better. It could be the next of kin. And if there is none, and you really think that they're necessary there, then you might want to go for an independent medical capacity advocate. But most times you wouldn't go through all those ways, because the research that they could be involved in, you could get people who hasn't got any mental impairment to involve in that research. But if you actually need that, then there's a whole requirement for the consent process that has to go on. In terms of children, well, again, there are also another special category. There's also a hierarchy of those who can consent on their behalf. Somebody, the parent, or somebody with parental responsibility, the hierarchy goes down. So in the consent process, all of these are quite highlighted. So for people who cannot give valid consent, who can act on their best interest. But the general principle is, if you can avoid them and you can do the research on people who has the capacity to make that consent decision, then do that. You only use them if you think that you cannot, and they're actually very important in that study. And the second question was, how do you report when the adverse event? These are strictly very outlined. On a serious event and on a serious untoward event, every trial will have to specify what falls under each category, and it is a requirement that you report them. It doesn't matter what they are. So for example, if you're giving somebody a medication, the trial for a tummy ache, and he comes and says to you, I got headache, you have to document that. And you have to go back to the trial list and say, is headache one of the things that I'm expecting as a side effect? You have to report it. But even if it is not, you still have to report it as somebody which is not expected. Even as bad as somebody having a road traffic accident on a drug trial, you have to report it as an event that has occurred. So anything that occurs, there are strict regulations on how you report them. And because the trial sponsors will have to look at all those at the end of it and see which ones are related to the trial medications or not. And what was the third question again? I can't remember the third question. I think there were three.
I think there were two.
Okay.
There were two questions. What are the procedures for reporting and addressing adverse events or breaches of confidentiality? I think that's what you're answering.
Oh yeah, breach of confidentiality is very important, because that's the data breach, isn't it? And that goes through every trial has a data officer who will be looking into all those. Every trial has a data management body. And of course, if you go through all of those people and they cannot address you, there's an information commissioner, which you can now go to. There are strict regulations on those things. I think there was something I was going to say as well about that, but it is important that we do realize that reporting any event on somebody, on a trial participant, is extremely very important. And even after the trial has finished and the medication has been rolled out into the community, you know, the yellow label thing. If you look at the back of the BNL, it's a yellow label where if a patient has any side effect that you think could be remotely related to the medication, you have to report it to the MHRA and stuff like that. So even after the trial ends, anything that the patient might have that you suspect could be due to the medication. And that's how post-study surveillance is being done. That's how people in phase 4 trials, they pick up any of those rare side effects. You have to report it as well. So it's a duty for anyone who is using those medications, for either on the trial basis or on the treatment basis, to report any event that you think could be remotely linked to it. I hope that answers that question.
And thank you very much, Dr. Valentine Ngwa. I think you've answered it exhaustively. I will pass the mic over to Dr.
Yes.
Assah.
Yes,
thank
you, Dr. Mbene. I think now that we're getting close to the end, let me just quickly point out that, again, everything will be edited and then will be placed on various platforms so that those people can actually come back and actually use this, the recording, this fantastic, informative webinar we've had today. Just to say that mark your diary for next Sunday, same time. Mark your diary for next Sunday, same time, and you're going to have the same faces again because we're going to have Dr. Ngwa, we're going to have Dr. Mbene, and a few others. What is happening next Sunday? Next Sunday, this time, CamDoc is focusing on career mentorship. We are looking at, this is a series we've been running since the Easter. We are looking at essentially how to inform, inspire, motivate the Cameroonian young professional Cameroonians, and of course, not just only Africans who log on, as to what are the career avenues that actually exist, not just in the UK, but globally. It's another CamDoc service to the community. So the young professional Cameroonian mentorship is same time next Saturday, the next Sunday at 6 p.m. Cameroon time. We will be addressing on that. We're going to have Dr. Ngwa, who will essentially be looking at the medical field of work. The world of work is changing nowadays. So recently, this field of health and safety is really picking up. There's a lot of, recently, some of us were in the Middle East recently, and those who follow the national, international media, the challenge of the Middle East is one huge construction jungle. Associated with that construction, a lot of accidents. And so health and safety is effectively one sector which is really blooming here in the UK and globally. So we're going to have somebody to speak on health and safety as a career avenue. Where on this, when we do this YPCN one, we get people who are already working in a specific sector professionally. They come on board and they tell us who they are, how they got where they are, and then they effectively, what are some of the highlights and some of the challenges they face in that particular professional sector. The hope is that they finish with some sort of can-do advice to those who are looking at joining their particular sector. So if you want to be like Dr. Valentine Ngwa in future, please make sure you log on next week. If you would like to be, of course, Dr. Annah Mbene will be actually moderating that session. There's one going to be on health and safety executive, which is a new career line, new in terms of us Cameroonian, but it's something that has been existing for a long time. And then we're going to also have somebody to speak on internet banking, the new phenomenon where you can sit in the UK. The days when you used to sit here, you want to pay money to your family in Cameroon on the Momo, you have to do all kinds of gymnastics. Those days are getting over because there's a Cameroonian, a small group of Cameroonians, they've come out with an internet banking system. And we're going to have Dr. Louis. Dr. Louis Nkohkwo. He will be actually talking next weekend, next Sunday, on this new phenomenon of internet banking that is actually being licensed by the UK government. Your money put in that bank is protected. UK law protects money for up to £85,000 for anyone who actually invests in that. So CamDoc would not be getting involved in this if they are not really sure about the governance. We want to reassure you. So log on next weekend. And once to just the point at which I want to thank everyone for actually joining us on a fantastic afternoon where we've had today on Involve. I hope what has come across has given you more confidence in terms of the effectiveness, the safety, the benefits of actually engaging in clinical research, in medical research. So before you log out, please, you might have to answer a few feedback questions. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Valentine Ngwa, Dr. Serge Engamba, Dr. Jean-Claude Katte, my co-moderator, Dr. Annah Mbene Ngah, and of course, the president of CamDocUK, Dr. Bello. Have a good evening, everyone, and see you all next week, Sunday, same time. Bye-bye.